What's going on, everyone? Spencer here. In this video, we're going to look at what happened in Connor McDavid's most recent fastest skater, where he posted his worst time ever of 13.69, losing for the second year in a row, this time to Jordan Caro's 13.55. Has the NHL's unanimous fastest skater lost a step, or is it something else? Well, that's what we're going to look at in this video. But rather than comparing his run to Caro's, we'll be comparing to his fastest run, which came in 2020. Why? Well, we know from all his previous attempts that McDavid should be faster than 13.55. So what went wrong? Let's find out. We're going to be looking at a couple different areas. First, we're going to look for any visual differences we see between the two runs. Then we're going to compare his routes, followed by looking at his splits to find out exactly where he lost, and lastly, some intangible factors that may have had an impact. Without further ado, let's get right into it by looking for some visual differences. And of course, we'll start like with any race at the beginning. On the left, we have his 2020 run, and on the right, we have his 2022. And the first obvious difference is the direction he starts in. In 20, he goes with a backhand side start, so he's facing the boards. Where in 22, for the first time, he goes for a forehand side start, so he's facing us. If it was me, that definitely would have caused a difference, but I don't think the best player in the world has a problem starting either way. What might have caused a difference, though, is where he started. In 2020, McDavid got a slight head start. He started further back from the red line. As you can see, his back foot is beyond the ref circle, whereas in 22, he starts in front of the ref circle. This slight head start translates to a full extra stride before starting the clock. In 20, notice he gets one cross under stride, one forward stride, and another forward stride, for 3 full strides before hitting the red line. Whereas in 22, he only gets 1 cross under stride and 1 forward stride. We all know the Dylan Larkin controversy was starting further back, and there's definitely an advantage to getting a full extra stride on the start. The next most obvious difference, and why I personally think he lost it, is in the second bend. Let's start by looking at 2020. Notice he doesn't miss a step. He seamlessly transitions from his forward stride to his crosses, and he's constantly crossing under and moving his feet throughout the entire bend. He looks like that smooth and relaxed Connor McDavid that we know. Fast forward to 2022, and we don't see those cross-unders that we expect from McDavid. Instead, he goes from his forward stride to a glide with a little bit of a shuffle. He only starts crossing again at around the halfway point, and he doesn't have that constant quick cadence like he does in 20. Although we'll never know why he opted for the glide, and I don't even know if he does, it is always fun to speculate. So here's what I noticed. In 2020, he places his outside edge foot down to start his crosses way before the bend, almost near the blue line. Whereas in 22, he only places his outside edge down, following his forward stride near the top of the circle. It's possible that he might have just missed his mark this year and wasn't comfortable starting his cross under so late into the turn, or maybe he just felt something was off when he got to the bend. Of course, we'll never know. But what we do know is that McDavid generates so much speed with his cross-unders that not doing them must have negatively affected his time. But we'll see when we get to his splits. But before that, let's take a look at his routes. In these fastest lap competitions, the route you take is very important. To map out his route, I split up the bends into 5 different points. The first point is when he's entering the circle. The second point is around the first cone. The third point is around the net, followed by the fourth point around the second cone, and the last 5th point is when he's exiting the circle into the straightaway. In an effort to save time, I'll just be showing the major differences. So if I don't show a point, it's either because he continued on the same path or there was no clear difference. With that said, the major differences that I want to highlight come in points 2 and 3 in both bend 1 and bend 2. Let's start with point 2 on bend 1. In 20, he cuts that first cone really tight. There's barely any room between him and the cone. You can see he's very far from the bottom of the circle. Let's see how that compares to 22. In 22, he's much further from that cone. Again, if you go to where he's exactly in line with the cone, you can see his foot is almost at the bottom of the circle. So we're seeing a much wider path around point 2 in 22. Let's see how that translates to point 3, which is around the net. And not surprisingly, he's tighter around the net in 20 versus 22. Notice in 20, he's cutting the crease in half. Versus in 22, he's almost at the goal line. Overall, he takes a significantly tighter path in 20 versus 22 on bend 1. With that said, let's go to bend 2, again starting with point 2, which is around the first cone. In 20, we see when his foot is exactly in line with the cone, he's at about halfway between the cone and the bottom of the circle, maybe slightly closer to the bottom of the circle. In 22, when he's in line with the cone, he's also about the same spot, maybe slightly closer to the cone. However, the interesting part about this point is the exit. In 20, when he's using the cross under, it looks like he travels quite straight, which puts him on a wider path going into point 3 around the net. Whereas in 22, it looks like the glide may have helped him stay on this arc to make a tighter path around the net. Then at point 3 in 20, he crosses right at the goal line, versus in 22, he crosses just above the goal line. So it looked like the glide may have actually helped him stay on a bit of a tighter arc in bend 2. The last thing to do is look at exactly where he lost it. Did the lack of crossovers in bend 2 do him over, or was it more the wide path in bend 1? Well, that's what we're going to find out. I did this by breaking up the race into 5 sections, which will be acting as our 5 splits. The first section is from the start to the blue line, then the entire first bend, followed by the straightaway, then the second bend, and lastly the far blue to the finish. I calculated them by looking at exactly where his foot started and finished the segment. Here's just one example. I tried to be as consistent as possible between 20 and 22, but take these numbers with a grain of salt as I did have to use my judgment. So anything that's a difference of a couple milliseconds, I would say is inconclusive or the same. In total, my calculated times came out to 13.18 for 2020 and 13.72 for 2022, which were off by 0.4 and 0.03 seconds respectively. I'd account for these differences at the start and the end of the race, as it's hard to know exactly when they started and stopped the clock, but everything in the middle should be pretty accurate. With that said, let's take a look at his splits. Finally, the results. And the results are not very surprising. All the straightaways are pretty much the same. The head start in 20 and the slightly wider route in bend 1 in 22 might have caused a slight difference, but again is not significant enough to say it's a true difference. What is a significant difference is that bend 2. Those lack of crossovers in 22 really did him in. The slightly tighter path in 22 was not enough to make up for the lack of speed generated. Lastly, we have the intangible factors. These are things that could have had an impact, but it's impossible for me to say. So I'll just list them off and let you guys decide. The first one is effort level. From what I know, McDavid is a competitive person, so I definitely think he wanted to win. But I also know that he doesn't care too much about personal accomplishments, and I have to imagine being the fastest skater is not his main concern. That being said, from his reaction and his cadence, it definitely looks like he tried his hardest. Could he have been hurt? It's possible. I remember during the All-Star game, the announcer said that Marchessault was brought in as an extra man on the Pacific team in case McDavid couldn't play due to a knee issue. But of course, McDavid played and they didn't ask Marchessault to go back home. But for the life of me, I can't find anywhere on the internet that says Marchessault was brought in specifically to replace McDavid, but that's what I heard the announcer say. And again, I have to assume that if McDavid agreed to being the fastest skater, that his knee was not bothering him. Next, we have his skates. Throughout his whole career, he primarily wore the CCM Jet Speeds, but wore the new CCM Tacks for the All-Star game. From our research, it looks like he made the switch on January 31st against the Senators, wore the new skates until February 8th, including the All-Star game, and then went back to the CCM Jet Speeds the next day against the Blackhawks. In my opinion, it looks like he didn't care too much about the skates, as he only wore them for just over a week, and maybe they had an effect on why he was a little slower this year. Last, we have his life. Who knows? Maybe he partied too much in Vegas before. I don't know. Again, all these points, it's impossible for me to say any of them had an impact, so I'm leaving it up to you guys to decide. That's going to conclude the video. If you like this video, check out my personal mechanics journey somewhere on the screen and consider subscribing for more. And as always, I'd love to hear your comments in the comment section down below.